Trump triumph with EU trade deal. Violence continues to scar America. Reports of universities making deals with the Trump administration. This is Dr. David D. Schein for Saving America with my own take on key stories from this past week focused on politics and business. And you need to be wearing track shoes to stay up with the news this week. Trump triumph with a EU trade deal. If the deal is as good as the early reports say it is between the USA and EU, it will be a clear win for Trump and all Americans. I expect China will do a real deal soon or face being left out entirely. Honestly, sounded like a boondoggle with Trump doing a 5-day trip to Scotland to salute the opening of one of his new golf courses. Then the news was that there would be a meeting of the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Then the meeting was being held and a deal announced very quickly. That raised my suspicions. I believe the whole thing was a setup and the deal was done before Trump headed to Scotland. Part of the deal is that EU had to know that the gig was up. Hey, the US bailed out Europe twice in 2 world wars. Then the Marshall Plan, which rebuilt Europe, and following that, America was played as patsies for 70 years with major European countries blocking US products and selling their products in the US for high prices, but not paying any meaningful tariffs. A piece that makes a lot of sense with the likely economic counterattack on Russia due to the Ukraine attacks continuing. EU is to buy a bunch of US energy resources. This is a win-win-win, speaking as someone who is a hardcore anti-commie. There is also reported major investment in the US by the EU of $600 billion. Details are lacking there, however. Part of the timing here is not an accident, as the August 1 Trump-imposed deadline to make a tariff deal is now up. On the heels of this, South Korea came to the table. The deal means South Korean imports will pay a 15% tariff rate. South Korea will also invest $350 billion in the United States and purchase $100 billion in U.S. energy products. On the flip side, Brazil may face a 50% tariff. The problem here is that it's a country where the U.S. has a trade surplus. The tariff is retaliating for Brazil's criminal prosecution of former President Jair Bolsonaro. Trump had threatened the tariffs earlier in a letter to President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. I believe this is inappropriate as this is internal legal business in that country. I note that both the countries of Colombia and Brazil, 2 major coffee producers, are in struggles with Trump. While inflation may be sort of tame, coffee prices are surging. Maybe we need Starbucks to get in there and talk to Trump. Trump has extended Mexico's time to make a deal by another 90 days. Not sure why he's doing that. Of course, it's an odd turn of events. Canada has not made a deal, and I think for Canada, this is a more serious error on their part than even with Mexico. Note that fentanyl smuggling is an issue with both of those countries, as well, of course, with China. All countries that have not made a tariff deal or being given an extension will be paying previously announced tariffs. China and the U.S. are under a truce in negotiations, so frankly, I'm not sure who's paying what right now with China and the U.S. As I've said before, I do want the U.S. and its allies to starve out China by doing all they can to stop buying anything from that repressive, murdering regime. That is how the first Cold War ended in favor of civilization, and likely will be the best way to end the current Cold War too. Despite what appears to be enormous progress with tariffs, 1 business and 11 Dem-controlled states have gone to federal court to challenge Trump's authority to impose these tariffs that we just talked about. Trump is using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. His pitch is that America is in serious trouble and needs to correct the severe balance of payments with much of the world. He's also raised national security arguments. The Federal Circuit currently is reviewing this and unlikely at the moment to rule in Trump's favor. However, I can foresee this bumping up to SCOTUS and expect that he may do better with the High Court. I could also see a split decision where in many cases it will be upheld, but not upheld, say, with Brazil, since we have a trade surplus there. I'll keep a watch on this for our loyal audience. Violence continues to scar America. Virtually the whole world knows there was a tragic shooting in New York City financial district. A deranged shooter from Las Vegas drove all the way to New York City with a high-powered rifle and then double parked his car in Manhattan. Photo shows this fairly young man calmly walking to the high-rise. He killed an off-duty policeman who was guarding the lobby and shot up the lobby. 3 more people were then killed and another man very seriously wounded. In a gift to the public, the shooter committed suicide. His suicide note that he's incurred a brain injury playing football. He reportedly, the target, he wanted to shoot up the NFL, even though he never played even college football, much less pro ball. About the same time, news broke of a sudden rumble in downtown Cincinnati that found 2 white people beaten badly by a crowd of black persons. There is some controversy about the white male who was beaten. Whatever happened there, a white woman tried to render aid to the man once he was on the ground, and she is sucker punched unconscious. That part is very clear in the videos of the incident. A handful of black suspects have been charged. So the racial overtones of this are disconcerting on top of the violence itself. A sad aspect of this was that people stood around and filmed the melee with their smartphones, but only one person in that crowd called the police. Again, this is sounding like a third world country, not America. I did hear a speech by the mayor of Cincinnati that sounded pretty positive on criminal justice enforcement. That remains to be seen, folks. And of course, we recently had 11 innocent people in Traverse City, Michigan, Walmart, who were attacked by a crazed man with a knife. He was taken down by good citizens, one of whom had a gun, and held until the police got there. 10 of the 11 required hospitalization, but all are expected to survive. There was no common denominator here, and the stabbings appeared to be random in nature. I want to note that I attended a training conference in Traverse City about 20 years ago. It is a pleasant small town of only about 15,000, known for its cherry festival. Violence has crept into even this peaceful small town. Then, in a quiet hiking area called Devil's Den, a young mom and dad were senselessly gunned down while their 2 young daughters were nearby. The killer was reportedly a former 5th grade teacher, of all things. No known motive for the killing. I call for no bond available and a prompt death penalty in this case. In Tennessee, a dating dispute, of all things, may have left 4 family members dead, including another young couple who now leaves an infant and orphan. I call for no bond available and a prompt death penalty in this case as well. They're still looking for that suspect, last I heard. My friends, I do not have an answer for this. Banning guns is not the answer. That violates our Constitution. Trying to keep guns away from crazy people is a nice idea, but also does not seem to be the answer. For instance, I believe the person who shot at Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, had no prior record. We must somehow calm the mood of the country. Anyone listening who has some suggestions, please let me know. I'm thinking of starting a bumper sticker campaign that just says, "Be kind to each other." That is inspired by my unscripted politics co-host, Kevin McDonald. The economy, good news, bad news. The second quarter GDP, the gross domestic product, a broad measure of the success of the U.S. economy, was a surprising 3% in the second quarter versus an expected 2.7%. This would seem to indicate that the Trump tariffs were not the killer that the Dems hoped that it would be. Now, think about this for a minute, folks. The Dems are rooting against the rest of us Americans and hoping that things will go bad. Further, even better news, part of the reason for the increase was an increase in buying American goods. However, Trump continued to rail against Fed Chair Powell for not lowering the Fed rate. Nothing new there. The Fed board just voted 9-2 not to change the rate. 2 commissioners have now come out in favor of the cut in conflict with Powell. This is not good news, as the housing market, a major part of our economy, needs lower interest rates to kick it into high gear. It is very depressed at the moment. As I recently noted, while inflation is not terrible at 2.7%, it is still well above the 2% Fed target. So that is the rationale to keep the Fed rate higher. Powell, by the way, still has 10 more months at the Fed. An interesting policy reversal by Target. In a time of intense competition among retailers, it seems that Target has taken a step back. It announced that customers will no longer be able to price match major competitors like Amazon and Walmart at the register. The policy has been in effect for about a dozen years. Shoppers used to be able to show the ad from the competitor showing a lower price for the same item. The policy is now limited to comparisons with other Target stores or its online operation. This does not seem to be getting into the trenches and competing with the other big guys. Reports of universities making deals with the Trump administration. Amid well-reported attacks on Jewish students and DEI discriminatory policies, the Trump administration has gone after a series of universities. One of the highest profile is Columbia University, just reported as a $221 million settlement agreement with Columbia. Frankly, this sounds like greed to get back on the U.S. government gravy train and not a real change of heart. This remains to be seen, of course. Subsequently, there have been rumors that fellow Ivy Harvard is willing to settle for as much as $500 million, but that deal is not confirmed at all. On the heels of this, UCLA paid a $6 million settlement regarding a campus Jew exclusion zone that resulted in discrimination claims from students and faculty members. This is yet another sad example, but again, does this mean there has been a real change of heart? With focus on the high-profile Ivies in schools like UCLA, I note with interest reports that George Mason University in Northern Virginia, which is close to DC, has been under investigation for race-based hiring policies. It apparently has already agreed to change practices, but the president who put this discriminatory nonsense in place, Gregory Washington, is still there. Having spent a lot of time in the DC area, I was interested to keep an eye on this school. In the meantime, speaking of university presidents and the state of Virginia, its jewel, the University of Virginia, had a sudden resignation of its president, Jim Ryan, just a short time ago. I'm not aware if there are any similar accusations or federal investigations that triggered this move. Reportedly, alumni and members of the board were upset at the woke direction UVA had taken over the last 5 to 10 years. In one report, I heard that UVA had a DEI director who was being paid more than any member of the faculty. As someone with 2 graduate degrees from UVA, I, for one, am happy to see Ryan leave. Let me keep the record straight. I want to see diversity and welcomeness across faculty, staff, and students of all American universities. What I do not want to see is illegal racial or other preferences that are not based on merit tied to individual contributions. And speaking as someone over age 50, it is time for all universities to stop discriminating on the basis of age. I have personally experienced it, which is ironic because my students enjoy the fact that I bring many years of business and law experience into my classrooms. More disturbing news on Russiagate. I've been holding back on my comments on Russiagate since there's been no indictments yet. However, this past week, FBI Director Kash Patel reported that an employee found thousands of relevant documents in so-called burn bags. This is consistent with these recent reports that some dirty folks in the FBI, along with unnamed deep state conspirators, helped to hide the real Russiagate scandal from the public. The newly discovered docs were turned over to Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley. I am not a fan of Chuck, who is about as fresh as a banana that's been on the counter for a few weeks. Let's see what he does with this information. Many conservatives out there are upset that there have been no indictments yet. Whatever happened to manners? I am from a large family with little financial means. However, from the time I was little, my mom emphasized good manners. These are basic things like opening the door for women and the elderly, saying please and thank you, and even which fork and spoon to use at a nice dinner. Little did I know how much that would help me when I was still a teenager. I was thrust into the public eye as a member of the press and the business world. I received wide acceptance during that period of my life, and I credit my upbringing. Last week, I was traveling to my annual teaching conference in Providence, Rhode Island. In the 2-hour flight, I sat next to a talkative lady from Providence. She shared that she was at a wedding and gave a lift in a rental car to 3 other people attending the wedding. One was a man her age, about 70. The other 2, a younger couple. She stopped for a quick top off of the rental car gas tank. Not one person got out of the car to help her pump gas or offered to pay the $12 to $13 gas bill. Manners have disappeared in this country. I shared with her that I never get in a car when there's a woman or child boarding the car. I also note that so many do not put their shopping carts back in the provided racks in the parking lots. This causes damage to other people's cars and is just rude. How do we practice better manners ourselves and help others to be more mindful? The point being, manners are in shambles in this country, and it shows. In my earlier commentary, I discussed a scourge of violence in America. Is there a tie-in between manners and not caring about our fellow humans? Just something to think about. This is Dr. David D. Schein. Thanks for joining me for this special edition of Saving America. Remember, a new Saving America show is aired on the Brushwood Media Network every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Listen on any of the 16 network stations, Apple or Google mobile app, Apple CarPlay, TuneIn, Smart Speaker, and all smart TVs. Find more information at the brushwoodmedianetwork.com. Please be sure to join us each week. We welcome and love your feedback from our growing audience.